when we got cut off before, Amin was talking about why, what the data can be used for, and why we should be a little bit careful about who is collecting the data and what it's being used for. If you can, if you want to continue where we cut you off.
No, you didn't. You didn't cut me off. The systems cut us off. I don't know what system it is. I don't know if it's just the electronic system or another system. You know, there are many systems, so you never know which one is it. So, well, what I was just saying, I think just to recap of what I was saying is that it's very important that we collect our data. There is very often what exists in the phone now, especially in Europe, is that the white group is writing about us. They're collecting data about us. We are just used as objects. You know, we need to become players, main players when it comes to our issues. So, and collecting our data is very important. I think one of the things that we're discussing in Finland here, it's among the African anti-racism group, is that we are planning that in the future we would need to do this kind of research, but it would be done by Africans, for Africans, and funded by Africans, because the people who fund projects have a stake in that project. The funders have a stake. So it's very important that we fund our own projects, and that because that determines what kind of projects we produce, the outcome of what we're trying to produce, especially when it comes to research. So it is very important that we are the center, we do it for ourselves, and the outcome, we should do it, that we should aim to use the data to empower us. That's my point.
Nothing about us without us, as they say. Yes, I second what Amin just said. I think another thing that is important and that is an issue in all our three countries, in Denmark, in Finland, and here in Sweden, is that unfortunately people of African descent do not promote themselves enough as a collective. And you know, and the reasons for this are many. Among the reasons is, of course, that you know, people of African descent do not have a long-standing collective presence in these countries. But then also because of that, you know, people tend to have such disparate identities, cultural identities, ethnic identities, other forms, even disparate racial identities. You know, there are many people of African descent in our countries that would not want to describe themselves as Black, or describe themselves as people of African descent, or describe themselves, you know, whatever terms we use, they would not want to describe themselves in this manner. And this is unfortunate because, you know, politically speaking, I think it's important for us to be able to speak of ourselves in collective terms in order for us to be recognized, and in order for the sorts of discrimination, call it anti-Black racism or Afrophobia, whatever you want to call it, but the sorts of issues of racism and discrimination that are facing people of African descent as people of African descent will not be properly recognized, probably, and addressed if people of African descent do not start to raise voices as a collective and demand recognition. And so, you know, that is just a political matter. I think we can even leave personal issues with about identification and identity aside. People get too bogged down with this identity issue. And it doesn't even necessarily, you know, have whatever identity you have, but be clear about your politics. And you know, so I think that is something that is lacking.
Thank you for that addition. Like we have crossed, or like it's been mentioned a couple of times, and the reason for us arranging this panel discussion is that we at AEC have a survey targeting people of African descent coming up very soon. As I mentioned in the previous live stream before we were cut off, we are currently working on GDPR rules and getting everything like that in order. In our survey, we have chosen to ask questions in a lot of different topics. Topics like demographics, everyday life, and when viewing the FRA report, as Amin also mentioned before, and as I mentioned in the introduction, 45% of all people asked in this survey from Finland felt that they had been experiencing racism within the last 12 months prior to the report's release. For Denmark, it was 41%. For Sweden, it was 38%. The most common reason for the said discrimination was skin color. How can better data on hate crimes, for example, or ethnic profiling, etc., help us combat this trend? And is enough being done at the moment? I think this question goes out to any one of you who wishes to or has some thoughts about it.
This was data from the Being Black in the EU report.
Being Black in EU, yeah.
Yes. Well, myself and Amin, we were involved in the production of that report, and I was involved in it from its conception until its launch, and including being involved in the launch itself and organizing it. Yes, you know, it paints, I think the report, of course, was a milestone, the first report of its kind, painted a very clear picture. However, we in the group of Black studies experts that were invited to Vienna to discuss a draft, I believe it was, of the report, or anyway discuss the drafting of the report. We had some issues with both the terminology, which we thought was a little misleading, you know, where the term race was not used when and how it was not used. There were euphemisms instead used, such as skin color, and other euphemisms also used terms. And so that was one weakness of the report, and how the questions were phrased. But also, you know, you just mentioned hate crimes and so-called ethnic profiling. It's not ethnic, it's racial profiling, but so-called racial profiling and hate crimes. Now, another issue that we had with the report, and this is a general trend in Europe, that whenever racism is spoken of, is usually these more extreme, if you will, forms of racism, overt, very explicit, often violent forms such as hate crimes that are spoken of, or right-wing extremism, Nazism, and so forth, or now to some extent also racial profiling. However, for most people that are subjected to anti-Black racism, it is very much an everyday issue that affects the way you live your life in society and your opportunities and your income opportunities, your employment opportunities, your housing opportunities, your love opportunity, your romantic opportunities, all sorts of aspects of your daily life that do not have to do with these more, if you will, extreme expressions, and have actually a deeper impact on your everyday life than these extreme expressions of racism have. Yet these extreme expressions tend to be the ones that are focused on, and there are, I think, some very specific reasons for this that maybe we can speak more about later. So thanks.
Yep.
Nicole, you can go first.
Nice to know that you were included in this Being Black in Europe report, because first off, I think it was, even though it had its shortcomings, it's a nice step. It's EU level. It's cool that we actually have something like that. When it comes to Denmark, in 2017, I think, like the end of 2017, they did a report called something like Afro-Danes or Afro-Dane in Denmark, something like that. But the report was more a qualitative study on how it is to be an Afro-Dane, they called it, in Denmark. And like you said, Michael, with the shortcomings, this Afro-Danes report had similar shortcomings. It didn't really include any, race terminology. It didn't really include anything about intersectionality, because the fact is that most people of African descent in Denmark are actually Black Muslims. It didn't really include that part as much, and if it did, it only mentioned it very in a very, very short or not so cohesive way. It also, it kept mentioning this thing called everyday racism, because that's what we call it in Denmark. It's everyday racism, but it didn't it didn't make a correlation between everyday racism and structural racism. That, as you said, it takes these extreme cases of hate crime, or instead of looking at the interpersonal level of racism, the microaggressions you experience at work as a Black person, especially a Black person in the techie marketing world that is very, very white and male dominated. It doesn't really mention anything about that. It's just to piggyback on what you said, that we too have some shortcomings in that report, just as in this EU Being Black in EU report, which is, it just proves the point that it depends on who is doing the collecting, who is creating the data, because then this is what you get. If they included more Black people, I think that these shortcomings would probably be improved, or at least addressed, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just to follow up basically to what Michael and Nicole just said. It's I remember I think a few months ago, I wrote a paper for a local newspaper in Finland. And in that paper, I described Finland as a white supremacist country. And the editor came back and said, no, how can you say that Finland is a white supremacist country? I said, it is a white supremacist country. And they said, no, it can't, because white supremacy is basically people who are violent, skinheads, and the ones who go around and shout that, oh no, the child is racist slurs. And I'm like, why? And this is the problem. The problem is that we look at issues of racism, like I said, we focus on the extremes. That if we can't even identify a country as a white supremacist country, and it's because we are looking at white supremacy as basically from the extreme point of view. We're failing to understand that all the forms that produce racism is based on white supremacy, every form. And I have fortunately done research on hate crimes in Finland. I was a country representative for ENPAD, doing research about hate crime in Finland, and I also done research on racial profiling in Finland, which was both qualitative and quantitative. And in all of these different research, one of the things I have come to realize is one, how we view racism. We have to help people understand that all forms of racism is violent. All forms. And that's why, for example, in my research, I don't use the word microaggressions, because if you say micro, that means you're trying to reduce it to a small thing. No, it is not. All forms of racism is violent. And because it's violent, one should paying attention, one should drawing people's attention to the fact that it is violent, whatever form it is. That word violence helps people build a consciousness towards understanding the effect of racism. Okay, it doesn't have to be physical. However it is violent. And other than that, one of the things I also realized is that there's a lot of denial. And this denial is based on this idea of white exceptionalism, Nordic exceptionalism, Finnish exceptionalism, Danish exceptionalism, Swedish exceptionalism. It's just based on the fact that we are so exceptional. We can't be that bad. We are doing a lot of, we are benevolent. We are nice people, and that is a problem. It's not about for me. It's not. It's not about being nice. You may be nice, but what you're producing is violent, consciously or unconsciously. And one of the biggest problems is also the legislation. When I did the research on hate crimes, I realized that what is considered hate crime in Finland will not be considered hate crime in Spain, for example. In Finland, if a victim of hate crime says that if the victim says that the particular incident or particular crime is a hate crime, the police the police in question, investigator is not obliged to investigate the crime as a hate crime. But in a country like Spain, for example, if the victim or anyone around the victim think it's a hate crime, the burden of proof lies on the police to show or investigate that crime as a hate crime. So unless we have this kind of legislation that forces action, then the authorities can hide behind, like I said, there are always this gray side that they can hide behind. And when I looked at the issues of racial profiling, and this is also very good research that I think you should look into for your study, because it has a good balance of the qualitative and the quantitative side. It's very interesting because some of the people we interviewed, some of the people we even talked to, Black people, they were very scared in terms of participating. They were scared of the consequences of their participation in a research like that. Worst of all, they were also scared about who is talking to them, because you are asking them to talk against an authority. The racist structure is governed by racist authority, right? So you're asking them to talk about this power authority, and they are scared. So in your research, you'll encounter people who are very scared, that would not want to participate, not because they don't like, but because they are intimidated by the whole idea of racism. So we have to find a way to make them comfortable, helping them to participate, because participation is key, right? Because if you do not participate, you're not stopping. You're not stopping the process. You're not stopping racism from occurring. Your lack of participation actually gives room for the system to reproduce itself.
Just to add to what you've been all been saying, I think also it is very important, hence also the reason why we at AEC have decided to create this survey for people of African descent in Denmark, that the questions are formed by people of African descent for people of African descent in order to formulate it in a way that makes it relevant and gives it meaning to people of African descent. As Michael mentioned before, and also as Nicole mentioned, I think, I mean, you also mentioned it too, if we have questions being produced by a racist system asking us about racism, they in fact do not actually want the real answer. They want the answer that fits their goal or their narrative. I got you. And on top of that, you will have, like Amin just mentioned, you will have some people of African descent who simply are afraid to answer these questions, because what are the consequences? Will I get a letter from the state saying, oh, you answered this, so it means you're not happy to be here, you know the way to the airport. Crossing that subject, how do we how can I put it? How do we confirm or make sure that when collecting this kind of data, that we affirm to the people we ask that this data is collected for the empowerment of people of African descent rather than pointing out negative parts about people of African descent?
I think,
Michael?
Yes, I think you need to emphasize confidentiality and anonymity, which should be a part of the data collection, and also from a legal perspective that is important, but also, of course, for the safety of the people who participate in the survey. So that should definitely be stressed, emphasized, and be told to anyone that is made to take the survey that we guarantee confidentiality and anonymity. We guarantee it. And let them know how the data is collected, for what purposes, who will hold the data, and who will not have access to the data, and that the state will never have access to this data, for instance, and who has participated or not participated in the survey. So that I think should be a critical part of the survey data collection. Yes.
Yeah, just to add to what Michael just said, I think one of the advice I'll give is that you have to be careful of hackers. I know of a group in Finland who did a research on a similar topic, and their research was sabotaged by hackers. So whatever you do, make sure your file is saved in unprotected servers, and the server should not be connected to the internet. And one of the things that you need to also do is it's that you need to kind of, your brand, who you are, is what will help people, will bring people to you. You should be able to reach out. You need to do a lot of networking. You have to do a lot of, you have to put your boot on the ground and say, this is important, we'll do this, push. You have to be very active to get the data, to get it so you can get to it, because sometimes people Just you want to talk to people. You know, we want to talk to someone behind the data, because sometimes you don't. We receive lots of these data set of these different call to participate in different research, but we don't know who's behind the research. So it's important that you are there and you are showing people that whatever they're doing is going. It's for the greater good of all the blacks in Denmark and around the world.
Just to, I mean, you already said most of the key points that I actually wrote down. I think like the overall message is some kind of transparency, but of course within reason. So, because as you said, I mean, there are people out there who are gonna sabotage. There are people out there who are gonna, you know, pretend that, I don't know, they're people of African descent and start answering random stuff, and then suddenly the data is kind of breached. So I think, of course, we need to have some sense of some level of security, make sure that the data we actually collect is being held in such a way that it's responsible for the people who are giving these testimonies anonymously, but also make sure that it's transparent enough for them to give it to us. Yeah.
I can mention, I think you all three probably know this, but for anyone who is watching in live, we do have a data security expert working on all these measures as GDPR and making sure that the data is collected and writing out or forming the public statements and also the descriptions of how to get your data erased if you wish to do so, and where the data is going to be stored and for how long we're going to store it, and also that we are not sharing this data with any second or third party groups, organizations, or private people. And also, of course, mentioning who is going to be in charge of the data when it is collected. So we have those things in process, and we'll have them in place by the launch of the survey. I can see I keep getting this message saying that the meeting will end again in 7 minutes for some reason. I still have a couple of questions. I don't know how much time the rest of you panelists have. I know we talked about a couple of hours. If you have time for another 40 minutes, as I can expect, I will be happy to invite you for another 40 minutes to continue some of the questions we have pertaining the survey, the upcoming survey we have. How does that work for you? Good. So since I can see we have another approximately 6 minutes, I will from here talk a little bit about what I know about data collection in Denmark, what data is available. I did a small research study on hate crimes in Denmark, and very quickly experienced the fact that the amount of registered hate crimes, officially registered hate crimes, are extremely low, usually between 400 to 500 hate crimes registered per year. And when you dig deeper into these numbers, you see that a lot of these crimes reported are several crimes reported within the same case or with the same perpetrator and victim. So it could, for example, be different types of violence or a series of violent attacks against a victim, where it will be registered as individual cases, but will be prosecuted as one case. But then again, when you look at the Justice Department, they every 2 years, I think, release a report called the Victims Report, where they go in specifically and ask victims what type of motive the victims believe has been behind the violence that they have experienced, and those numbers show that between 4,000 and 5,000 of violent victims or victims of violence in Denmark has the feeling that it was racially motivated. So this number compared to what the police is registering and what the police or the information that the Danish government is giving to international organs shows that there's a lot of dark numbers, a lot of cases where the victim feels that it has been racially motivated, but where either the police or the court system decides that this is not the case. Just before we get cut off, how do you guys think we can combat this trend or this problem about the different perceptions of when something is a hate crime and when something is not a hate crime? How can we bridge that gap between the dark numbers and the numbers registered? If anyone feels they have an answer for that. Nicole, feel free.
As much as I could hear from the question and having my stepdaughter in my ear all the time, you were talking about how we could make sure that, let's say, different cases are, perceived as racism or what they are, instead of them telling us otherwise. The thing is, at least that's my experience in Denmark, is that we don't really have a vocabulary to talk about racism in the first place. We're literally like at level 1 when it comes to this. So I think it's like there is some learning, some education, and some how can you say it? There is some learning to do. Like, we need to make sure that Denmark has a vocabulary, and we don't, let's say, look at the states as our identity marker to use that as an example, because we keep using the states as our context, even though that Denmark has its very own context of racism and anti-Black discrimination. So first and foremost, we need the vocabulary. Like, we don't does it make sense what I'm saying? Like, we don't have the vocabulary to talk about it, and maybe that's why it's not being acknowledged for what it is.
Anyone else has something to add to this?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I think we did the same. We were in the same. We did the same study. I think you were doing the same. You were the country representative for and now in Denmark, right? Samuel. Yes, and I did that for Finland. It's very interesting because I think one of the most important things, like I said earlier, that who determines what a hate crime is? Is it the victim, or is it the police officer? And also, even marking a crime as a hate crime is not a police. It's not officers in Finland are not obliged to do so. And even if it's marked as a hate crime, there isn't any there isn't any place where they can mark it as a hate crime as a result of, for example, religion, skin color. So all of these different data sets are missing. So we need to kind of look into how to fix legislatures and adjust the system so we can collect the right kind of data.